We live, you can vote here.
Okay. Oh man. Hey, peace. Are y'all able to see me? All right. Welcome to another episode of We Charge Colonialism podcast and book club. I am Ikemba, member of the Public Relations Committee.
Peace, everyone. This is Tyranny Cherie. I'm the steering committee chair for We Charge Colonialism.
Peace, everyone. This is Frank Maubat. Great to have you back again this morning. Member of WCC, chair for the Revolutionary Repatriation back to Africa.
All right, and we are your team. And as usual, I want to encourage everyone. First of all, I want to thank everyone for tuning in, as usual. But I want to encourage you to like and share. Make sure you like and share, and continue to put those comments in the chat. It's very informative, and also it's informative for those who are viewing and for myself. So I'm learning a lot from you guys. So continue to engage in these discussions. So this is our podcast and book club. The second half, we're going to continue with How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. We're continuing with that reading on page 135. I'll get the page number to the PDF to you guys if you're going to be reading from the PDF. I'll make sure you have that for the second half. But as usual, we start off by looking at issues around the world concerning Africans in respect to these colonial conditions. So we're going to start off with Frank. You want to start us off with?
Yeah, the news for this morning is relating to the COVID virus and the new virus that have been detected, as they say in Africa, the Omicron virus. But which of course this virus before it was detected in Africa or in South Africa, it was already been diagnosed, detected in Europe, in the United States, or places like Netherlands, or in all those places, and even it was named to the WHO that this particular virus was already being identified in the Netherlands. But the WHO did not do anything about it, and the IT said that they didn't hear it. However, believing that there's an agenda behind this whole COVID-19, to put fear into the African people and to sanction the African people in the way that they will put ban on various countries or nations in Africa that will put fear into people and to make people to take the vaccine. They came out with a plan, I would believe so, because this virus was already being diagnosed in this part of the world. They came out with a plan to say this virus, this new virus was discovered in South Africa. And in that now, Europe, America, and they start putting ban on African nations for African to not travel to Europe or to the United States. But this virus have been diagnosed here into America, into Europe, and people have been traveling, Europe coming by and all of those places. Then why not only in Africa that they discover it, and then they will put ban on African nations. But the reality here again is, we African, I think we need to look deeper into this. It's not just about putting ban on African nation. If we don't learn from this coronavirus, then I don't think we're going to learn anymore. Here is Cuba. Everything that is going on, Cuba had their own vaccine. They vaccinated their own people, and Cuba is free. Nothing is happening there. Then why Cuba wanted to bring vaccine to Africa, and the United States and Europe said that they put sanction on Cuba for Cuba not to take their vaccine to Africa. Only European vaccine and American vaccine should go to Africa. Is that not colonialism? Is that not a form of colonialism, stopping people from getting what they want to get? So these are some of the things that are going on and things that is not right. And I think African leaders need to step up, because at the end of the day, they don't need to listen to EU. They don't need to listen to NATO, because at the end of the day, they're going to be put down on the bus, and they're going to neglect us, and they're going to leave us hanging, and they're going to leave us to die.
Hey, thanks for bringing this story, Frank. I think this is important to look at. One of the issues that South Africa has, like other African economies, is that it's inextricably tied to the former. I don't even like saying former colonizers, just because of the relationship between the West and these African countries. But there was a story, about a year ago, where they weren't able to manufacture their own medicines to counter the virus, right? Because the colonizer had an interest, economic interest, in producing vaccinations for the people in Africa. But it's crazy, like you have this history of people who have continuously oppressed and exploited the people, brought genocide to a people, and now they're supposed to come with a solution to save lives in Africa. And I like how you brought up Cuba as an example of a people who can do for self, and so and the difference between Cuba and South Africa and a lot of these other African countries is that Cuba is not, they're not beholden to these Western imperialist powers like the African leaders are. A lot of these leaders are in a position where they have an economic interest, an individual interest, to stay tied to these colonial powers. And so that's part of the problem right there. But I don't know, Tyranny, if you wanted to add something.
The longer that this pandemic goes on and on, the more I feel like I'm just in the matrix. It's just like, are we really experiencing like what we're seeing? Because so much of the information that we're being fed is controlled. So much of it is controlled by our enemies, our oppressors. And that's a relevant factor that we can't ignore, particularly, like you said, the vaccine issue, like with Cuba. Cuba has a vaccine. I don't even think it's an mRNA vaccine. It has a higher resistance rate. It's been proven a higher resistance rate than both Moderna and Pfizer. And yet the WHO, controlled by obviously the Western powers, has blocked them from being able to distribute that vaccine. So they're only okay with you having certain types of vaccines. That is in itself should be a red flag. And I feel like a lot of our people, because we just see this as the only solution, we assume that this is the only solution. But the question that you should be asking is, why is it that whenever countries try to push for solutions that they deem to be in the best interest of their people, and it's not in line with Western interests, why aren't those equally solutions? So it's really like a lot of people have called it vaccine colonialism. That's what we're experiencing. We're experiencing, I think, this kind of like scare tactics, with these new variants. It's like constantly inside of your news feed to try to push you towards their solutions, and not understanding that there are other people who are trying to also push autonomously for their own solutions. So I think we just can't ignore the nature of the system that we're dealing with. I'm not anti-vax personally. I know some of our people are, for good reason. I personally am not, but the way that these things have been rolling out, the way of control of the media, even something simple like, if this video, assuming it doesn't, get any red flags and it stays up, there's going to possibly be some type of disclaimer on every single video that deals with a controversial topic. Everything in YouTube now has a disclaimer. More and more, it's like we're literally being locked into this matrix where only certain people get to tell their narratives, and everyone else, if you don't comply, then you get silenced. And so it's just, I feel like there's dangerous precedents constantly being set inside of this time. And if we're not awakened to every single step that these imperialists are taking, then I think we're going to be in a much more dangerous situation, particularly as a people who are looking to free ourselves from colonialism, trying to free ourselves from these world dominating forces. They control the media, they control the corporations, they control the pharmaceutical companies. So what is truth anymore when your enemy is literally controlling all of those facets of your life? What is truth? So that's how I feel. It's just like more and more, I don't know, like, where am I? What is happening? How am I supposed to understand the world? It's like more and more, the rug is just being pulled from under me.
Yeah, and speaking on this topic, right? I wrote a poem called COVID-92, right? And my chairman, Omali Yeshitela, he talks about this being a colonial virus. And that's what, COVID-92 talking about 1492 when Europeans went into the Americas and also Africa. They were already there prior to 1492. But the point is that through capitalist exploitation, you have masses of African people and oppressed people around the world who are more vulnerable to these viruses and diseases. They're not able to get the health care that's needed to prevent or to even, help them recuperate from viruses or sicknesses. And so all of these, what do they call these preconditions? Is that how they describe it? That, a lot of that is brought about through the colonial conditions that our people are in. And so us being vulnerable, now the same people who have created these conditions are coming saying, hey, the conditions we created is the reason why so many of you are sick. But hey, we have a solution here, buy this from us. This is going to help. But it doesn't solve the problem, at the end of the day. But that's another thing I wanted to add, and this is why colonialism. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. Okay, no, I was gonna say, like, that's the point that I think we also have to keep in mind. Like, the American healthcare system is not built for prevention; it literally is built for treatment. I think over and over again, you see like the medications, the solutions they give us is it really to make us whole. It's to make us, tolerable to continue working as slaves inside of the system, but not to heal us. And so that's another question that we have to have: is that, are these blanket solutions, like you said, Ikem, but these are colonial conditions, when you're talking about, so there's this study that came out, saying something like people are seeing a lot of heart conditions coming up, from certain people getting vaccinated or something like that. There was a study that was done, and it was a news story this week. And that stuff really matters whenever you are inside of colonial conditions, because already our people already have bad health conditions, bad heart conditions, bad conditions that make us more vulnerable to every single thing that's done with this system. So it's another good point. We have to really have an intentional mindset that what they have proven to us they're willing to offer is not what we need. So we have to get amongst ourselves, leave our white liberal masters, leave them where they are, and get amongst ourselves as a people and have honest and thorough evaluation of what we need and what we don't need.
You wanted to add something, Frank?
Yeah, let me just add something to it quick because we're running out of time. They stop it here. But what I want to add to it is that this is, when we talk about the scramble for Africa, when you really look up before the coronavirus, we saw to it that Africa was actually on a path of actually saying no to the colonial master or saying no to this imperialist nation. And we saw to it that African leaders were vigilant and vigorous in coming together, mobilizing, about Africa, and even leaving a colonial master, getting along, even with Cuba, people, they were getting along with Cuba and with other nations that are not even allied to their colonial master, and they were working together. And the colonial or the imperialist saw to it that, they were losing ground. So these are all part of the metric, to divert Africa from its attention. Now you can imagine, since the whole coronavirus, all those coming together of Africa, discussing about Africa, even the East Africa in the West, the South, all of them coming together, discussing about one currency and everything, all of them died down. And within our same time, you saw the European Macron going to Europe, going to other European nations, talking about they mobilizing. That's the only way they can beat China, from overpowering Africa. Since that didn't work, and England, even had they have to leave, or how they call it, I think the EU and all of those things. That in itself, we should know that this coronavirus, have turned away the attention of African people, because what happened here is, we should also know that these imperialists, they are still the one funding these colonial nations, or let's say these nations that were colonized. So when this was happening, like they were all moving around, leaving towards leaving their colonial master, they have to come up with a plan in order for them to go back to seek help. And that is what's happening now. So these nations are going back to their colonial master now, seeking help again, especially when it comes to the ban on African nations and things. So that is what's happening right now.
Right on, right on. So we're gonna move on. We still have more stories to give. You know, these topics be so you know, good as far as like the discussion wise, man. Sometimes, you know, we get into it, but we're gonna go to the next story. Tyranny, you gonna tell us what's happening in Niger, right?
Yeah, Niger. I'll try to go quick so Ikemba has a lot of time. But yeah, so in Niger, I'm sure many of you have heard there were recent attacks on civilian populations who were protesting the French presence inside of Niger. So just going to briefly, discuss. So there was a French military convoy. Actually, I can share my article so that you all can see and follow along. But yeah, so there was a convoy. And by the way, tell me, my co-panelists, if my article shows, because sometimes I'll be thinking it's on and it's not showing. Is it showing right now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So yeah, so there was protests inside of Niger. A French military convoy was heading to Mali, and it ran into trouble in the town in Niger after it was being delayed for more than a week by protests in Burkina Faso. So you can kind of get this image in your head. They're trying to get from one country to another. Protest in Burkina Faso has significantly delayed the French people from moving through Niger. So they're already pissed off, basically, because as we know, Africa's not really down with France as they used to be. And with the Nigerian government reporting 2 deaths, so basically there was some type of violence that happened, and the French started shooting in civilian populations. The supply convoy arrived in Africa and Ivory Coast last week. It had crossed Burkina Faso on Friday and entered into Niger on its way to Mali. The clashes broke out, and it says the convoy of French Barkhane forces, escorted by the National Gendarmerie, was blocked by very violent protesters, so they say. And basically, it resulted in the deaths of 2 people and 18 people were wounded. So this is, first of all, props to the people who stood up, because so many times, for so long, we've kind of become desensitized to the colonial presence, to where we have people literally occupying our places, you could use this analysis in an internal colony if you're in the US or something, in a country like that, where you have your white supremacist government patrolling the streets. You could use this inside of the external colonies inside of Africa. We've become desensitized to these things, and props to the people of Burkina Faso, of Niger, of Mali, so many places, Chad, so many places that we've seen say, no, we are not okay with you patrolling us as a people. We're autonomous. We can do this ourselves. We don't trust you. You've shown that you are very vicious towards Africans, so we're not going to tolerate your presence. But this kind of shows also how the international community will turn their backs on Africans and pretend as if these things aren't happening. Could you imagine if the opposite happened, if there were some Africans who were of the military or something that opened fire and killed 2 Europeans? The outrage would be out of this world, particularly when these people are unarmed. So this is why we have to take this very serious, that we have to get these imperialist presence out of our countries, out of our communities, and that we have to hold the international institutions accountable when they are silent. Why are you only silent whenever it's France killing Africans? It's not the first time French military has killed unarmed people. We talked about a previous instance where they were found to have killed many people inside of a village. Silence from the international community. Why are you silent whenever it's people who look like Europeans or who are Europeans? But whenever it's Africans who are doing certain things or said to have done certain things, all of a sudden there's a terrorist threat. So who's the terrorist? That's the question that I would just end this by asking. Who's the terrorist? Is the terrorist the one who stays inside of their country and tries to fight for liberation, or is the terrorist the one that goes outside of their country, patrols the streets of civilian populations who are unarmed, opens fire, and kills numerous people? Who's a terrorist?
I'm gonna let Frank answer that question. I'm trying to find a page on this PDF. But yeah, Frank, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, the answer to that question is very simple. The French military are the terrorists. European Mediterranean Africa are the terrorists. Foreign Mediterranean Africa proliferating there are the terrorists, because they are not fighting the terrorists. They are not killing the terrorists, the ISIS, the Al Qaeda, but rather they are killing innocent African who stand up to that and say no, because you are not fighting the terrorists, you are not fighting the terrorists, but rather the terrorists are coming in, burning our villages, our town, and you're not fighting them, and you in Africa here with the mutual agreement, so to speak, that you are there to also fight to protect African people. But how can you be there to protect African people, but you protect the terrorists and arm the terrorists and then go and kill innocent African when they ask you that you cannot come here because you're not protecting us and the terrorist people are overtaking, our area. But let me just say this. I always use the Middle East as an example. When the foreign military was in the Middle East, they were not just all over. They was basing at a specific place or places, and those places where they are, where they have the mineral resources. Those are the place, the United States military or Marine or Navy, whatsoever. Those are the places that they were air basing and protecting the place or places. And it is the same way in Africa. These European military or American military, they are not just in Africa passing all around. They are seated to specific places, and those places are the mineral resource area. For example, the area the French military were going in Niger were where they had the uranium. That is where the French military were going to protect, so that the access or the terrorist group cannot come there. And that's how the people stood up onto them for 1 week and said, no, you guys cannot go here. We don't want you people here because you guys are fake. And then you open fire on the people and kill the people and then wounded 18 people. And World Health Organization or UN, the so-called UN, other than the so-called human rights, other than silent, and they can't talk about it because it is African, because it is what 3/5 of a human being, of a lesser human being, that have been killed. It's not they are still speaking the colonial language or languages on African people in this current time.
Hey, yeah, is this African or is France acting?
So France version of African, they had Operation Barkhane, which they're supposed to be supposedly downscaling, because of all the anti-French backlash they're selling, that they're going to start withdrawing troops. But yes, this is essentially the French AFRICOM, you could say.
Okay, yeah, and I mean, you may have mentioned it, but it's it's always under the guise. The West is always under the guise of fighting Al Qaeda, right? How many years has it been like fighting Al Qaeda and terrorist organizations, right? And so I think like the people have in the particular article, I was reading the article, and the people, they're tired. They want France out of their country. So, I mean, how come we're in 2021 and we still have people who came into a continent, colonized the people, exploited the people, still have a military presence there, and still have economic, I did a story on French company in Central African Republic, who basically controls the economy of the CAR, which is one of the poorest nations in the world. So yeah, I think like the only way that they come into Africa is on the terms of African people, and that's not happening. And even if it's on their terms, it's still you're still dealing with neo-colonialism, and the masses of people are not benefiting from it. So it's this right here, this struggle that's taking place. We always have to look at it as working class, the workers, the laborers, and the poor who are fighting against these imperialist powers, because they understand the contradictions that exist within their societies, right? And so these are the people who are on the front line. These are the people who are losing their lives. And so we have to stand with them.
Yeah, just one more thing. Like you
Yeah.
said, the contradictions, like this is the contradiction of people who talk about we need to spread democracy in Africa. When you see so many Africans who are on the ground, who are the masses, you see them all out saying no French presence, and yet the same government that supposedly represents them is still supporting France. Clearly, those governments that said that they're representative of the people aren't representing the people. So these are the contradictions that we have to point out consistently. You're saying that it's supposed to be majority rule. Majority saying that we don't want French presence. How is it that the people who keep winning are people who support France? Clearly, there's something going on inside of this quote unquote democracy you've given us that is not true to what you're telling us. So that's another important contradiction.
All right, right on, right on. So yeah, continue to invite and share too. We're about to get into our book reading, but I got this story that I've been doing some research on. I'm gonna have to do a part 2 to this, but I'm looking at what's taking place in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I came across an article called "Hunt for Blood Diamond: Batteries impedes Green Energy Push." So I'm like, okay, blood diamonds, what are they talking about? Of course, like cobalt, right? And this cobalt is needed the cobalt is used for electric cars, for the electric batteries that are put into cars. And now with this push to go more green, this is becoming more coveted by, the more industrial nations. So in doing the research for this, in reading the article, it took me somewhere else. Not gonna lie. I was looking at this company, Greco Mines, which is a state-controlled company, and I'm gonna get to that in a second. But so what's happening is they're doing some reconstruction with the mining. There's a guy named Albert Yuma Mulimbi. So remember that name, Mulimbi. He's a power broker in the DRC and chairman of a government agency that works with the international mining. That government agency is Greco Mining. Now, Greco Mines. Greco Mines is a company that's about 115 years old. So it goes back to the colonial era. But before it was called Greco Mines, it was called Union Mineral du Haut, UMHK. We're just going to say UMHK, right? This was a company. I looked into the company, and they were founded by the Tanganyika Concessions, which is a British mining and railroad company, and the translation. I'm translating the Dutch. It's the German Company of Belgium, which was a large Belgian bank. So these was the colonial companies, corporations that were inside of Africa who founded this company that's today Greco Mines. When Mobutu took control in the Congo, he nationalized it, right? You say, okay, he nationalized it, it's going to help the people. We already know Mobutu, he was a what's the word I'm looking for? But he was a dictator, he was a kleptomaniac, right? But this was the person who exploited the people of the Congo and was part of what happened to Patrice Lumumba, his assassination, right? But this was a dictator who was in power for decades, exploiting the Congolese people. So this company today is state controlled, and I'm gonna wrap it up here. But I wanted to look at its affiliates, some of the companies that are working with Greco Mines. So they forge partnerships and joint ventures with companies such as the Anglo-Swiss. We got Anglo-Swiss, Glencore International, American, and then Freeport McMoran, which is an American-based company in Arizona. And if you look at this company, they got revenues up in the billions of dollars, which is also, so they're doing business in the Congo as well as the Eurasian Natural Resources Corporation, Eurasia, which is based in London. So I bring all of this up just to show like the international character. The story, the article really doesn't get into that, but like I said, I was like, hold on, I want to see what this company is about. But this international character where you have the West, European-based companies and American-based companies who are working in the Congo with this state-controlled African, controlled company to exploit the resources of the Congolese people. And we know that child labor conditions, you have conditions of child labor in the Congo, as well as just like inhumane work conditions. So I just wanted to bring that up and see if y'all wanted to add anything to it before we transition.
This is very indicative of the colonial system, and everyone within the next couple of weeks, WCC has been working to organize some with other Pan-Africanist organizations under a coalition called Africa Unity Movement for Decolonization. We're going to be releasing a report within a few weeks that's going to list a lot of colonial corporations that are doing these types of things. Obviously not all of them, because there's just so many that, this probably will have to be an ongoing list for a long time. But Ikemba, just a note to you, but let's make sure that if Greco Mines is not included, I know Glencore is included already, but let's make sure if Greco Mines is not included, that we add them to the report. The other thing, though, is that I think where you started off was very important for us to understand. A solution to the West is not a solution to Africa, many times. Meaning we're being marketed this whole idea that we need battery cars because oil is running out, because we're running out of this resource. This is how they're saying it. But look at this. The same batteries that are going to be taken, we're sat at the same position that we're in with oil. The oil was seized by the West. The oil is being depleted by the West. Now they're going to be depleting the Congo, already under siege part of Africa, of cobalt, which everyone's involved in. Tesla, everyone is trying to get this cobalt for their own interests. We're told this is good for the world. This is good for the environment. And of course, we want clean air. That's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is, how is it that every single solution that they poise is not a solution whenever it comes to us? And this is what's going to continue until we actually get them off of our necks, because colonialism is always going to have a bad backdrop when it comes to the colonized.
Did you want to add anything, Frank?
But there's a question in the chat there. But before we can answer that question, colonialism was based on exploitation. So if colonialism was based on exploitation, if slavery was based on exploitation, that means those that colonize, or those that enslave us, those that exploit us, right? They can never bring solution to the African problem. That's what I want to say. But we can answer the question in there.
Yeah, that's a good question. If we're talking about the same question, if y'all wanted to tackle that before we transition, I think we should spend a couple of minutes touching on that. The question, yeah, there it is. So if France vacates its African presence, will the former Franco countries be able to fight Al-Qaeda-backed groups on their own? Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab and anti-African and dangerous? Yeah, but that's the question.
Let me get on that question. First of all, in answering our question, let's look back in the 60s, when the African nation were gaining independence. Most of our African leader that was assassinated. Now, for example, Thomas Sankara, the French presence in Burkina Faso, Zalatan, they had a military there, right? They had a base there. So even in DRC Congo, with Patrice Lumumba, the French have their base there, or the Belgian, they had their army there, and so forth, right? So if the French or foreign military leave Africa, will we be able to fight these people? Of course, yes. With their presence, what have happened? Nothing. In fact, the more we get these terrorist group into our area, onto our continent, and they are the one funding these terrorists. They are the ones supporting these terrorists. So if they leave and the African people bear themselves up, that means we should take control of our land. of our, how they call it, water body, the sea coast. We should take control of it and protect it. If we do that, where will the foreign military pass on the sea coast to come and give arm or fund to the Al-Qaeda or to ISIS? We should control our airspace. If we do that, where would they fly with their plane or whatsoever in the sky to bring supply to the Al-Qaeda or to the terrorist group? There will be no way for them to pass to bring support to these people, right? So yes, we can fight them if these people leave the continent, because by their presence on the continent, they are the one funding these terrorists. So they are there, they are not fighting the terrorists, but every day, problem increase, bombing taking place, and all of those things. So if they leave, we can solve our problem. So we shouldn't depend on them, because that's the notion that, that's the colonial mentality. If these people leave, we will not be ourselves. We will not empower. Since they've been to Africa, what have happened? Our problem become, more and more deployable and backward. So we don't need them.
And I agree with Frank. I also want to add a different type of perspective. I think many of us are watching this stream, not everyone, but a number of us are from the United States. We have gangs, many of us inside of our communities, and we know that it's very easy for the media to just paint a blanket picture and say the gangs that are in your community, they're bad, they're shooting up people, they're bringing drugs and all of this. But we have to also understand that they are a creation of the white supremacist system. And it's the same thing with terrorism. If you understand the history behind a lot of these groups at one time were Western funded. They were Western proxy groups. And whenever they got out of hand, then they became terrorists. Another thing that I also want to emphasize is that there have been a lot of people who have studied in depth not insurgency, but increased terror attacks happening inside of places, whether it's Africa or the Middle East, what the correlation is to that. The correlation is the more the West is present inside of a territory, the more that they're droning people. So we have to understand, when people go to these groups, they're not necessarily just evil people like the media wants us to think. A lot of them are people who had nothing, who basically faced their families being murdered by a drone attack, who have witnessed for themselves the effects of Western imperialism, and they might grow a hate towards the West. They don't channel it the way that they should be channeling it, but they're reacting based on how they're being influenced by those around them. So because of that, the more that the presence of Western troops, the more killings that are happening, the more drone attacks, the more shootings of people, that actually increases terror groups, that makes them that increases insurgency. So it's not a solution. They make us think it's a solution, but the truth is, if they were not present, then the problem would be more manageable. Now we have a problem much bigger than it should be, but we have to find a way to organize and figure it out ourselves. Otherwise, it's only going to get worse, and we're going to be seeing a lot of countries inside of Africa facing complete regime change by people who do not have the collective interest of Africa in mind. So I agree with Frank. No, they won't make it better.
Hey, appreciate that. And with that being said, that was some great information from both of you. We're going to transition to the book, and so I found the page on the PDF. It's 211. So if you click on the link and you use the PDF, the link that's placed in the chat, you can follow us on page 211. If you're using the book, we're on page 135. Page 135. Continue to like and share. We want to appreciate everybody who's commenting, staying engaged, and viewing this podcast and book club. So I'm gonna go right into it. We're gonna read and we're gonna discuss. So I'm starting at the subheading where it says the coming of imperialism and colonialism. In the centuries before colonial rule, Europe increased its economic capacity by leaps and bounds, while Africa appeared to have been almost static. Africa in the late 19th century could still be described as part communal and part feudal, although Western Europe had moved completely from feudalism to capitalism. To elucidate the main thesis of this study, it is necessary to follow not only the development of Europe and the underdevelopment of Africa, but also to understand how those two combine in a single system, that of capitalist imperialism. the European economy was producing far more goods by making use of their own resources and labor, as well as the resources and labor of the rest of the world. There were many qualitative changes in the European economy, which accompanied and made possible the increase in the quantity of goods. For example, machines and factories rather than land provided the main source of wealth, and labor had long since ceased to be organized on a restricted family basis. The peasantry had been brutally destroyed, and the labor of men, women, and children was ruthlessly exploited. Those were the great social evils of the capitalist system, which must not be forgotten. But on the issue of comparative economics, the relevant fact is that what was a slight difference when the Portuguese sailed to West Africa in 1444 was a huge gap by the time that European robber statesmen sat down in Berlin 440 years later to decide who should steal which parts of Africa. It was that gap which provided both the necessity and the opportunity for Europe to move into the imperialist epoch and to colonize and further underdeveloped Africa. The growing technological and economic gap between Western Europe and Africa was part of the trend within capitalism to concentrate or polarize wealth and poverty at two opposite extremes. Inside Western Europe itself, some nations grew rich at the expense of others. Britain, France, and Germany were the most prosperous nations. Poverty prevailed in Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and southern Italy. Inside the British, French, and German economies, the polarization of wealth was between the capitalists on one hand and the workers and a few peasants on the other. The big capitalists got bigger and the little ones were eliminated. In many important fields, such as iron and steel manufacture, textiles, and particularly banking, it was noticeable that 2 or 3 firms monopolized most of the business. The banks were also in a commanding position within the economy as a whole, providing capital to the big monopoly industrial firms. European monopoly firms operated by constantly fighting to gain control over raw materials, markets, and means of communication. They also fought to be the first to invest in new profitable undertakings related to their line of business, whether it be inside or outside their countries. Indeed, after the scope for expansion became limited inside their national economies, their main attention was turned to those countries whose economies were less developed and who would therefore offer little or no opposition to the penetration of foreign capitalism. That penetration of foreign capitalism on a worldwide scale from the late 19th century onwards is what we call imperialism. Imperialism meant capitalist expansion. It meant that European and North American and Japanese capitalists were forced by the internal logic of their competitive system to seek abroad in less developed countries opportunities to control raw material supplies, to find markets, and to find profitable fields of investment. The centuries of trade with Africa contributed greatly to that state of affairs, where European capitalists were faced with the necessity to expand in a big way outside their national economies. I'm gonna stop there. I tried to get I wanted to read a few paragraphs so we can make up for some time. But yeah, but again, Walter Rodney going in detail, talking about this relationship between Europeans and Africans and how it developed. And so, I always appreciate the going to giving the foundation of this relationship that we have and how it all developed. Again, like here, I think, Walter Rodney's talking about this early relationship between the Portuguese and Africa that's going to evolve. I don't want to use the word evolve. I'm going to say devolve, right? From equal footing. He really doesn't go into it, but, this trade is happening. And it's not just human trafficking that's taking place, but there's trade and gold, rice, and other products are being traded, iron and so forth. I'm gonna say metals that are being traded between them on equal footing. But this relationship begins to change, though. And so, but I think it opens up. What Walter Rodney is getting at is that this unequal relationship the unequal relationship that's going to develop is a result of Europeans benefiting from the most of this human trafficking that's taking place, or this trade in general that's taking place. and it kind of is weakening African societies to the point that now, when we come to 440 years later, when we have he's referring to the Berlin Conference, now they're at the point where they became strong enough where they can say, hey, now we can go into all of Africa and really divide this land up the way that we see fit and exploit the way that we see fit. But it all has its origin in that initial relationship. But even when we look at this, this history, we understand that there were one of the things that we have to understand, that there were African people who were in positions of power who was working with these colonizers or future colonizers, right? And so I think it kind of, it gives us an opportunity to learn from the mistakes of those leaders, and understand too, like, this is the working class were the ones in this society, the ones who were enslaved and the ones who were exploited in this relationship between the leadership of Africa and the leadership of Europe. And so we see the same thing today. We have people who are selling out the African working class. And so I think it gives us the opportunity to see, like, what type of society that we need to develop. Because these societies too the communal societies were vulnerable to those communities that were more complex, and we're beginning to talk about African societies that were beginning to create more of a social hierarchy within their societies where the working class was being exploited. And so, and those societies were the ones, the leadership of those societies were the ones who were going, I believe we're going into the more communal societies who did not have the technological advantage to, propel this type of exploitation that was taking place. But I don't know if anybody else would to add something. We'll write it there.
Another thing, I love, we can never emphasize enough, and, we might have been listening like, okay, we know these things, but we can't emphasize enough the fact that the correlation between the riches of European society and the impoverishment of African society, there's a direct correlation, because that's going to help us understand why there's such a organized and concerted effort by the European powers to ensure that we do not become in control of our own resources. They understand that Africa being able to control what we talked about, the cobalt, the oil, the gold, the diamonds, being able to control their own lands, being able to control their own agriculture, their own waterways, all of these mass land infrastructures will literally lead to the demise of the European empire. And if we understand that, then we stop trying to negotiate with terrorists, because we understand that there's no negotiation when you're asking a people to go from being the most rich in the world to go from being at best mediocre, at best, just surviving. So we have to understand why this is a system is built this way. The fact that we are poor is because they are rich. The fact that we are powerless is because they are powerful. And when we understand that, we understand the fact that there's no negotiating. There's only pushing for revolutionary power, revolutionary change, revolutionary actions. And anything less than that is not going to truly free Africa.
Yeah, and a quick point too, just going back to the structure of these societies as well, like those complex societies. When I say complex, I'm talking about these societies that begin to develop more like urban communities, and then you have sort of like specializations that are going to take place, and then the creation of this hierarchy. Like those societies too, because they're oppressive and exploitative in their nature, those societies tend to have more of like military presence and are able to take advantage of those more communal societies where there is that, Ubuntu, which we mentioned, on this program sometimes we talk about Ubuntu. I know Ruti brings that up. Those societies where that philosophy is I am because we are, we're we're like, how can we work together so that we all can survive? And so when that society comes in contact with a society where it's individualistic and how can I take advantage of you for my own interests, we're going to have what we had 500 years ago. And so what we learn from that is, okay, yeah, I am because we are, but now we understand that there are people out there who do not have that same nature or that same philosophy. And so we have to prepare for that now. Frank, did you want to ask?
Frank, also, there's a question I think you would like to answer.
Oh, yeah, what's that?
I just saw it. I think it's this. I can read it. Are they creating another plan to depopulate Africa? You have seen Prince Charles saying that our population growth is harmful to human life, and China government's willing to offer 1 billion in vaccines.
Of course. I mean, what we're seeing here is just the continuation or the maintenance of the colonial, presence that was left in Africa, and is that the maintenance of their great grandchildren, holding on to it. So Africa is not free to. I mean, in reality, we may think that it's free, but if Africa was free indeed, what we sitting here discussing, we wouldn't have been here. We have been saying something different. So Africa is still colonized. Africa is still in their hands, right? And doing what they are doing in their best interest. So we are not free, because if we were free, we would have been maybe discussing something different, like either what Cuba doing, and would have been providing for ourselves. We would have been providing vaccine for ourselves, then waiting for white Jesus to bring vaccine for us, then waiting for white Jesus to come and give us how do you call it, some crumbs or aid, then waiting for white Jesus to come and tell us, oh no, this part of the economy is bad, we need to come and fix it for y'all. So they are still calling out because we have to wait for them to come to give us what we need. And if they say no, and then we have nothing, we suffer, we die, and then they put sanction on, or they tell us, they say you can't. I mean, Africa is not free. We are not free. You see, so I don't even want to say they are trying to depopulate or this. I mean, that is all part of the agenda. Because let me tell you something. The more the population, the more, how to call it, you will find resistance. I don't want to say violent, because we are not violent. We are resisting. You see, we are resisting the colonial maintenance of the colonial children. You see, so we are not violent. We are resisting. And the continuation of the colonial mentality, of the colonial violence. They are the one violence. You see it? So yeah, I think that's the answer I can come with to that question. Africa is not free. We are still being colonized. We are still being controlled. And when you are being controlled, then you are a colony, because you have nothing to say. People tell you how you should live your life. If I control you, I colonize you. You have no freedom.
I think Frank, okay, you got it. But I'll just add, that I agree, we're not free. And I wouldn't draw a correlation between China giving vaccines to Prince Charles saying we need to depopulate Africa. Prince Charles is literally one of the people who are pushing things like family planning, pushing things like basically trying to push African women, who many of whom like having more kids than Europeans, to stop. And so that, I think, is very different, because they understand a threat to Africa is coming. I don't, necessarily think there's anything insidious about the vaccine from China, but I haven't looked into it a lot. So I would just add that part.
Look,
yeah, I'm going to.
Let me ask you this. The white man will not come and free or any vaccine from the white man land or whatsoever, any help, right? There is something behind it. Either it is destructive, or either it's going to make you less powerful, or either it's going to make you puppet, or either it's going to make you bourgeoisie and so forth. The thing here is for them to maintain, right? To maintain their power over African people, their power over Africa, to continue to colonize us, to continue to exploit us. So they are not coming in any way to help us in our own interest. So why he bring vaccine to us? I mean, if indeed they really want to help us, right? Why they can listen to African people, where African people want to go and get help. If indeed the prince men want to help save Africa, then why African people decided to take vaccine from Cuba and they said, no, you can only accept our vaccine like coming from us. So is there something in their vaccine that they bring it to us, they're not telling us? So they're not helping us. If they're helping us, let them leave off to have our own will to go to where we want to seek help. Period.
Hey, I'm gonna leave it on this last paragraph just to see if y'all had some feedback on the last paragraph I read. And just the point I want to raise too is just the system of capitalism being parasitic. So somebody bringing up like depopulation, right? Like the system itself, it doesn't need to come up with a program, to be honest, because the system itself is killing. It serves it works people to death. It kills people. Like it's depopulating by starving people all over the country where they're not able to feed themselves as a result of the system like that. Like that's the system. The system of capitalism is a depopulation, program, especially among our peoples. But there has to be like this surplus labor, which we provide. And then everybody else, our population, our people become expendable in this system. And so, I just wanted to raise that. So in order for that to be prevented, there has to be a revolution in the system. But this paragraph right here, your thoughts, so that penetration of foreign capitalism on a worldwide scale from the late 19th century onward is what we call imperialism. Imperialism meant capitalist expansion. It meant that European and North American and Japanese capitalists were forced by the internal logic of their competitive system to seek abroad in less developed countries opportunities to control raw material supplies, to find markets, and to find profitable fields of investment. Did y'all want to say anything about that?
I think it's all true and important to understand the linkage between capitalism and imperialism. Imperialism is the overarching system. It's an overarching system, but in it there are different layers. Obviously the layer of colonialism and neo-colonialism, and capitalism is a very necessary part inside of every single system of imperialism. So I think what he's trying to get people to understand is why capitalists inside of Europe had to leave their own domains and seek other countries. Globalization is marketed as being something for the globe, but look at the conditions of Africans under a globalized world as opposed to when we were left to ourselves, or not left to ourselves, but left without all this emphasis on pushing for international trade. So we have to understand that this was a necessary facet for the capitalists. They had to go outside of their territory and are continually looking for new markets to dominate and exploit.
You had any final thoughts, Frank?
Tyranny just said it. But I want to answer a question. There was a question asked about Liberia, something in there. I don't know who asked that question.
Okay.
So let me use that to get that person point across. I don't know, what's the question? Can we still get it back?
Yeah, the question, it came up on the screen. I didn't see the question.
Yeah, it came on the screen about Liberia. I think about okay. Yeah, so Frank, here is for you, what advantage do Liberia have in helping the continent to resist white supremacy or colonialism, since it is touted as not having a colonial master like others? First of all, that's a myth. Liberia have a colonial master. The United States colonized Liberia. Ethiopia, as I know, was the only country that was never colonized. So that's a myth. But America is a country, right? They never want to take blame for what they did. They'll always try to divert what they did onto something different. But when you really do your research, you will find out that the United States government actually funded the ACS. The ACS did not just come into like, okay, we are the ACS, the American Colonization Society, we're going to Africa to carry African there and all of those things. And in fact, when you do research, you actually see that the mission, they said the mission was the ACS was to take African people back home. That was not a mission. They had different motives, they had different mission. But again, That's the history they bring to us. But what? Let me answer the question here. First of all, the most fearful weapon that the imperialists fear is Pan-Africanism. That's the only weapon they fear. So how can Liberia fight to become part of the whatsoever to fight white supremacy or colonialism? It's just Pan-Africanism. Africa or Liberia just need to join other Pan-Africanist nation, other Pan-Africanist organization with the Pan-African ideology of decolonizing Africa, decolonizing the mind. Other than that, Liberia alone cannot fight white supremacy. Liberia alone cannot fight neo-colonialism or colonialism. Liberia can only join a Pan-African organization, a Pan-African institution, and Liberia can only defeat neo-colonialism or white supremacy by becoming a Pan-African nation, period.
Hey, it's 11 o'clock. He was like Pan-African period. That's how you end it right there. I appreciate that. Hey, I want to thank everybody for tuning in to this hour. We will be back as usual on Saturday at 10 o'clock. So tune in next week. Continue to like and share this program as we continue to build. And we're going to continue to read from How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. So again, just appreciate you all staying engaged and tuning in. And until next time, peace.